The stagecoach jolted over another rut in the dusty Texas road, and Willow Monroe pressed her gloved hand against the wooden frame to steady herself as the driver above cracked his whip and urged the horses faster through the September heat of 1878. She had been traveling for 3 days from San Antonio to reach Dalhart, where her aunt's failing health demanded her presence, and every mile brought her closer to the woman who had raised her after her parents died of fever when she was 12. The other passengers, a portly banker and his thin wife, dozed fitfully across from her, their heads bobbing with each bump. But Willow could not sleep. Something felt wrong. The driver had been pushing the horses too hard for the past hour, and she had caught glimpses of dust clouds rising in the distance behind them, as if other riders were following at a steady pace. She leaned toward the window, squinting against the glare of the afternoon sun that beat down mercilessly on the sparse landscape. Mesquite and scrub brush dotted the flat terrain, offering little shade or cover. The wind carried the scent of dry earth and horse sweat. Her dark auburn hair, pinned carefully beneath her bonnet, had begun to come loose from the journey, small curls escaping to frame her face. At 23, she had made this journey alone against the advice of nearly everyone in San Antonio. But Aunt Margaret had no one else, and Willow would not let her die surrounded by strangers. The crack of a gunshot split the air, and the stagecoach lurched violently to the left. The banker's wife screamed. The banker grabbed for his satchel, his face draining of color. Willow's heart hammered against her ribs as she heard the driver shouting above, his voice hoarse with fear and exertion. "Raiders, hold on!" More gunshots followed, the sharp reports echoing across the empty land. Through the window, Willow saw 4 riders gaining on them, their faces covered with bandanas, their horses lathered with sweat. The stagecoach swayed dangerously as the driver attempted to outrun them, taking a sharp turn that nearly tipped them over. The banker's wife was praying loudly, clutching her husband's arm. Willow tried to think clearly through her terror. She had $50 sewn into the lining of her traveling bag and her mother's silver locket around her neck. If these men were ordinary bandits, they would take whatever they could carry and leave. But she had heard stories of worse things happening to women on these lonely roads. Another shot rang out, and this time Willow heard the driver cry out in pain. The stagecoach began to slow, the horses neighing in distress. Her stomach dropped. They were going to have to stop. The raiders would board the coach, take everything, and God only knew what else. She reached into her reticule and wrapped her fingers around the small derringer her aunt had insisted she carry. It held only 2 shots, and she had never fired it at anything but tin cans behind her aunt's house 3 summers ago. Her hands trembled. The stagecoach jerked to a halt so suddenly that Willow was thrown forward, barely catching herself against the opposite seat. Dust billowed through the windows. The banker was pulling his wife down, trying to shield her. Outside, Willow could hear the raiders shouting, their horses circling the stopped coach. Boot heels hit the ground. Someone was checking the driver above, and she heard a groan of pain. So he was still alive at least. "Everybody out, now!" The voice was rough, tinged with cruelty and impatience. The door was yanked open, flooding the dim interior with harsh sunlight. A man with cold gray eyes peered in, his bandana pulled down now to reveal a scarred face and missing teeth. He gestured with his revolver. "I said out. Ladies first." Willow's mouth was dry as desert sand, but she forced herself to move, to climb down from the coach with as much dignity as she could muster. Her legs felt weak beneath her traveling skirt. The banker's wife came next, sobbing, followed by her husband, who kept his hands raised and his eyes downcast. The driver sat slumped on his seat above, blood seeping through his shirt sleeve, his face gray with pain and shock. There were 4 raiders, as she had counted. The one with the gray eyes seemed to be the leader. The others were younger, mean-looking men with the restless energy of wolves circling prey. One was going through the mail pouches attached to the coach. Another was already reaching for the banker's satchel. "Everything you got," the leader said, his revolver moving between the 3 passengers. "Money, jewelry, watches. Make it quick, and maybe we let you live to tell about it." The banker fumbled with his watch chain, his fingers clumsy with fear. His wife was already pulling rings from her fingers. Willow reached for her reticule, feeling the weight of the derringer inside, knowing it would be suicide to try to use it. 4 armed men against 1 inexperienced woman with a 2-shot pistol. But as she opened the drawstring, the the leader's eyes fixed on her with an interest that made her skin crawl. "You are a pretty thing," he said slowly, stepping closer. "Real pretty. Boys, I think we might keep this one for a while." The other raiders laughed, ugly sounds that made Willow's blood run cold. The banker's wife whimpered. Willow's mind raced. She could run, but they would catch her in seconds. She could scream, but there was no one to hear for miles. The Derringer suddenly seemed less like suicide and more like her only chance. Her fingers closed around the grip. The shot came from somewhere in the rocks to the north, a sharp crack that sent one of the younger raiders spinning to the ground, clutching his leg and howling. The leader whirled, bringing his revolver up, but he had no target. The landscape seemed empty except for the mesquite and stone. "Who's there?" the leader shouted. "Show yourself." Another shot answered him, this one kicking up dust near the leader's boots. He jumped back, his face flushing with anger and alarm. The remaining two raiders were looking around wildly, trying to find the shooter. "I suggest you boys mount up and ride out while you still can." The voice came from the rocks, deep and calm and utterly without fear. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed, rough from disuse, but steady as granite. "I got a Sharps rifle, and I can drop all four of you before you clear leather properly. The next shot takes the life of your friend there on the ground if you do not start moving." The leader's jaw clenched, his eyes scanning the rocks frantically. Willow could see the calculation in his face. He could not see the shooter, did not know if there was one man or many. The raider on the ground was still screaming, blood pooling beneath his leg. The odds had shifted, and suddenly the spoils did not seem worth the price. "This is not over," the leader spat, but he was already backing toward his horse. "We will remember this." "I am counting to 10, the voice said. 1. The raiders scrambled for their mounts. The one who had been shot tried to pull himself up, his companion helping him into the saddle with rough hands. By the count of 5, they were galloping away to the south, a cloud of dust marking their retreat. Willow stood frozen, her heart still pounding, the Derringer still clutched in her hand inside her reticule. The banker was holding his wife, both of them staring at the rocks. The driver groaned above them. For a long moment, nothing moved except the wind stirring the dust. Then, a figure emerged from behind an outcropping of stone about 30 yards away, leading a large buckskin horse. The man was tall, easily over 6 feet, with shoulders that spoke of years of hard labor and muscle earned through survival rather than vanity. He wore buckskin trousers and a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt, and his hair, dark as a raven's wing, hung past his collar in thick waves that caught the sunlight. A beard shadowed his strong jaw, and as he came closer, Willow could see eyes the color of storm clouds, watchful and intelligent beneath dark brows. He carried the Sharps rifle with the easy competence of someone who had been born with a weapon in his hands, and a knife hung at his belt beside a well-used revolver. He was the most ruggedly handsome man Willow had ever seen, all hard planes and masculine strength, and she found herself staring even as her mind struggled to catch up with what had just happened. "Everyone all right?" He stopped a respectful distance away, his gaze moving over each of them, assessing for injuries. When his eyes met Willow's, something passed between them, a flicker of recognition that had nothing to do with prior acquaintance and everything to do with something deeper, more primal. She felt it in her chest, a sudden tightness that had nothing to do with fear. "The driver shot," the banker managed, finding his voice, "but I think the rest of us are unharmed, thanks to you, sir." The stranger was already moving toward the stagecoach, setting his rifle aside as he climbed up to check on the driver. His movements were efficient, practiced. Willow watched as he examined the wound, his large hands surprisingly gentle. "Bullet went through clean," he said, his voice carrying down to them. "He will live if we get him bandaged proper and keep the wound clean. Where were you all headed?" "Dalhart," Willow said, surprised at how steady her own voice sounded. "How far are we?" Those gray eyes found hers again as he climbed down, pulling bandages from a pack on his horse. "About 10 miles. I can get you there, but we need to move soon. Those raiders might come back with reinforcements, or they might be stupid enough to circle around for another try when they think I have let my guard down. I am Marcus Ellis, and I have been tracking those particular snakes for the better part of a week." "You are a lawman?" the banker asked hopefully. Marcus shook his head as he climbed back up to tend to the driver, wrapping the wound with practiced efficiency despite the injured man's groans. "I am a tracker and a hunter. I live in the mountains north of here, and I come down to trade my furs a few times a year. I saw those raiders hit a supply wagon 2 days back, killed a good man who was just trying to make a living. Been following them since, waiting for the right moment. Today provided it." Willow watched him work, fascinated despite herself by the capable way he moved, the strength in his arms as he helped the driver down from the box. The driver was pale and shaking, but managed to stay on his feet with Marcus supporting him. "Can you drive a team?" Marcus asked the banker. The portly man shook his head miserably. "I'm afraid I cannot, sir. I'm a banker, not a teamster." Marcus did not sigh, but Willow saw the flicker of resignation in his expression. "Then I will drive. My horse can be tied to the back." "Madam," he turned to Willow, "can you help keep pressure on his wound during the ride? It is still bleeding some." "Of course." Willow stepped forward without hesitation, though the thought of being responsible for a man's life made her nervous. Marcus helped the driver into the coach, settling him on the seat where the banker had been. The banker and his wife reluctantly got back in, clearly still shaken, but equally clearly wanting to be anywhere but standing exposed on this empty road. Marcus paused before climbing up to the driver's box, looking at Willow with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You handled yourself well back there. I saw you reaching for something in your bag. Armed?" She felt her cheeks flush. "A Derringer, 2 shots. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, not quite a smile, but close. "Against 4 armed raiders, that took courage to even consider." "Or foolishness," she admitted. "Sometimes there's not much difference." This time he did smile, just a little, and it transformed his rough features, warming them. Then he was moving again, tying his horse to the back of the stagecoach and climbing up to take the reins. Willow settled herself inside next to the driver, pressing the bandage against his wound as Marcus had instructed. The man's face was clammy, but he nodded his thanks. The stagecoach lurched into motion, slower now than before, the horses tired from their earlier sprint. Through the window, Willow could see the empty landscape rolling past, could feel every jolt and bump as they covered the miles toward Dalhart. She found her thoughts returning again and again to the man driving above them. Marcus Ellis, a mountain man living alone in the wilderness, skilled enough to track raiders and confident enough to face down 4 armed men with nothing but his rifle and his nerve. He had saved her life, saved all their lives, and yet he seemed to expect no gratitude, no reward, as if helping strangers was simply what one did. The driver was dozing fitfully, his breathing shallow. The banker and his wife were quiet, holding hands, the near brush with death having stripped away their earlier drowsiness. Willow kept pressure on the wound and watched the sun sink lower toward the western horizon. If Marcus's estimate was right, they would reach Dalhart by nightfall. She would find her aunt, help her through whatever time remained, and then return to San Antonio and the quiet life she had built there as a seamstress. This day would become a story she told, an adventure that broke the monotony of her existence, and Marcus Ellis would become a memory, however vivid. The thought brought an unexpected sadness which puzzled her. She had known the man for less than an hour, spoken perhaps a dozen words to him, and yet something about him called to her, made her want to know more, to understand what drove a man to choose solitude in the mountains over the company of civilization. She had always been practical, sensible, the sort of woman who thought things through carefully before acting. But watching Marcus climb down from the rocks, with the sun behind him, seeing the way he had taken control of the situation with quiet authority, she had felt something shift inside her, something that had nothing to do with practicality or sense. The sun was painting the sky orange and pink when the buildings of Dalhart finally appeared on the horizon. It was not a large town, perhaps 500 souls at most, but it had a main street, a church steeple rising above the other structures, and the glow of lamps being lit against the coming darkness. Willow felt relief wash through her. They had made it. The driver needed a doctor, but they had made it. Marcus guided the stagecoach to a stop in front of what appeared to be the town's small station, little more than a shed with a sign that read, "Butterfield Stage Line." A few men were loitering nearby, smoking pipes in the cooling evening air. They straightened when they saw the coach, their eyes going wide when Marcus climbed down and opened the door to help the injured driver out. "Get the doctor," Marcus said to one of them, his tone brooking no argument. The man took off at a run. Willow emerged from the coach, her legs stiff from the long ride, her traveling dress dusty and wrinkled. The banker and his wife came out after her, already talking rapidly to the gathered townspeople about the raider attack and the mountain man who had saved them. Willow only half listened. She was looking for Marcus, who was unhitching his horse from the back of the coach with economical movements. She walked over to him, suddenly unsure what to say. Thank you seemed inadequate for saving her life, but what else was there? Mr. Ellis, she began. He turned, and in the fading light, his eyes seemed even more striking, lighter against his tanned skin. Just Marcus. I'm not much for formality. Marcus, then. I am Willow Monroe. I wanted to thank you. If you had not been there, those men would have... She could not finish the sentence, the reality of what might have happened suddenly too vivid. But I was there, he said gently, and they did not. You are safe now, Miss Monroe. Willow, she said, wanting to match his informality, wanting to establish some small connection. You saved my life. Any decent man would have done the same. She shook her head. I think we both know that is not true. Most men would have stayed hidden or ridden away. You put yourself at risk for strangers. He looked uncomfortable with the praise, shifting his weight and adjusting his horse's reins. Those raiders needed stopping. I'm glad I could help. Where are you staying in town? My aunt lives here, Margaret Miller. She runs a boarding house on Elm Street. Do you know it? Recognition flickered in his expression. I know it. Good woman, your aunt. Fair and honest. I have stayed there once or twice when I come down to trade. She's been ill? Willow nodded, her throat tightening. She wrote me 2 weeks ago. The doctor says it is her heart. I came as quickly as I could. Then you should go to her. She will be worried, expecting you. What about you? Will you stay in town? He hesitated, and she saw the conflict in his face, the instinct to return to his solitary life, warring with something else. I need to report the raider attack to the sheriff. Make sure he knows they are in the area. After that, I will probably head back to my cabin. I have traps to check, and winter will be coming before long. Need to be prepared. Disappointment flooded through Willow, sharp and surprising. Of course. Well, thank you again, Marcus. I hope... What did she hope? That they would meet again? That he would choose to stay in this dusty little town instead of returning to the freedom of the mountains? I hope you have a safe journey home. Miss Willow? His use of her first name sent a small thrill through her. I will check on you tomorrow before I leave. Make sure you reached your aunt safely and that she is doing as well as can be expected. Would that be all right? The relief that swept through her was out of proportion to the simple offer, but she did not care. That would be very kind. I am sure my aunt would want to thank you as well. He nodded, then swung up onto his buckskin horse with the easy grace of a man who spent more time in the saddle than on foot. For a moment he looked down at her, and Willow felt pinned by that gray gaze, as if he were seeing past her dusty traveling dress and proper bonnet to something deeper. Then he touched the brim of his hat in farewell, and rode off down the street toward the sheriff's office, his broad shoulders straight, his posture relaxed. Willow stood watching until he disappeared around a corner, then turned to ask one of the lingering townspeople for directions to Elm Street. The banker and his wife were already being led away by concerned citizens. The driver was being carried toward what was presumably the doctor's office. The excitement of the evening was beginning to spread through town, voices rising as the story was retold and embellished. But Willow paid it little mind. She gathered her traveling bag, ensured her reticule with the derringer was secure, and started walking in the direction she had been shown. Margaret Miller's boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure with a wide front porch and flower boxes beneath the windows, though the flowers had wilted in the September heat. A lamp burned in the front window, casting warm light onto the street. Willow's heart squeezed at the sight. This had been her refuge after her parents died, the place where Aunt Margaret had taught her to sew and cook, had listened to her dreams and fears, had shaped her from a grieving child into a capable young woman. She had not been back to Dalhart in 5 years, too busy with her seamstress business in San Antonio to make the journey. Guilt joined the worry in her chest. She climbed the porch steps and knocked softly. For a moment there was silence, then the shuffle of footsteps. The door opened to reveal a tall, thin woman with graying hair pulled back in a bun. Her face was lined with years and illness, but her eyes were the same sharp blue Willow remembered, filled with intelligence and warmth. Willow. Margaret's voice cracked on the name, and she reached out with trembling hands. "Oh, my dear girl, you came." Willow dropped her bag and embraced her aunt carefully, shocked by how frail she felt, how much weight she had lost. "Of course I came. Did you think I would not?" "I hoped, but it is so far, and you have your business." Margaret pulled back, examining her niece with eyes that missed nothing. "But something happened. You are pale, and there is dust on you that speaks of trouble. Tell me." So Willow did, following her aunt into the boarding house and settling into the familiar kitchen with its worn table and ancient stove. She told the story of the raiders and Marcus Ellis while Margaret made tea with shaking hands, refusing Willow's offers of help. By the time she finished, the older woman was sitting across from her with an expression that was equal parts relief and concern. "Marcus Ellis saved you," Margaret said slowly. "God bless that man. He has stayed here a few times over the years, always polite, always quiet. Pays in furs or gold dust and never causes trouble. I always thought there was sadness in him, some old wound that drove him to the mountains. But a good man through and through." "He said he would come by tomorrow before he leaves," Willow said, trying to keep her voice casual, "to make sure we are all right." Margaret's sharp eyes narrowed slightly, a smile tugging at her lips despite her obvious exhaustion. "Did he now? That is interesting." "What is interesting about it? He is just being thorough." "Willow Monroe, I raised you from 12 years old, and I know when you are trying to hide something. You are interested in this mountain man." Heat flooded Willow's cheeks. "I barely know him, Aunt Margaret. We spoke perhaps 5 sentences to each other." "Sometimes that's all it takes. One look, one moment. And you know," Margaret reached across the table to pat Willow's hand, "your uncle and I, God rest his soul, we met when he helped me fix a broken wagon wheel. Took him 10 minutes, and I knew right then I was going to marry that man." "Marcus lives in the mountains," Willow pointed out, trying to be practical. "He is a tracker and hunter. I live in San Antonio and make dresses. We could not be more different." "Or more complimentary," Margaret countered. "But I am too tired to argue with you tonight, and you must be exhausted. Your old room is ready. We can talk more in the morning." Willow wanted to protest that her aunt should not have been preparing rooms in her condition, but she bit her tongue. Margaret was proud and independent, and being treated as an invalid would only hurt her. Instead, she helped her aunt up the stairs, noting how slowly Margaret moved, how she had to pause on the landing to catch her breath. The doctor had been right. Margaret's heart was failing, and there was no medicine or treatment that could stop it. It was only a matter of time. The thought brought tears to Willow's eyes as she settled into her old room with its faded quilt and simple furniture. She undressed in the darkness, too tired to light a lamp, and climbed into bed. But despite her exhaustion, sleep did not come easily. Her mind kept returning to the moment when Marcus had stepped out from the rocks, rifle in hand, every inch the fearless protector. The strength in his arms as he had helped the driver, the way his eyes had softened when he looked at her, the deep timbre of his voice, rough from disuse but somehow soothing. She barely knew him, as she had told her aunt. But Margaret was right. Something had sparked between them in those few brief moments, something Willow had never felt before. She had been courted a few times in San Antonio, had even considered one man's marriage proposal before ultimately declining. The prospects had been nice enough, respectable, but there had been no fire, no sense of rightness. With Marcus, that feeling had been immediate and undeniable, like recognizing something she had not known she was searching for. But what good did it do? He would come by tomorrow, check that she and Margaret were well, and then ride back into his mountains. She would stay here with her aunt until the end, then return to her life in San Antonio. Their paths had crossed by chance, and by chance they would separate. That was reality, and Willow had always been a realist. Yet as she finally drifted into uneasy sleep, her last conscious thought was of storm-gray eyes and the feeling of safety that had washed over her when Marcus Ellis had spoken from the rocks. Morning came too quickly, announced by roosters crowing and the sound of wagons rattling down the street outside. Willow rose, washed from the basin on her dresser, and dressed in a simple blue day dress that was far less travel-worn than what she had worn yesterday. She braided her auburn hair and pinned it up, then went downstairs to find Margaret already in the kitchen, attempting to make breakfast. "Let me," Willow said firmly, gently steering her aunt to a chair. "You should be resting." I have rested enough, Margaret protested, but she sank into the chair with evident relief. I will not spend my last weeks being useless, Willow. The blunt acknowledgement of her impending death startled Willow, but she forced herself to respond with equal honesty. Then tell me what needs doing around the boarding house, and I will help you do it. But you need to save your strength, Aunt Margaret, please. They ate breakfast together, Margaret picking at her food while Willow tried not to watch her with obvious concern. Afterward, they went through the running of the boarding house. Margaret currently had 3 lodgers, all long-term residents who paid by the month and generally took care of themselves. There was an older cowboy named Jake who worked at the livery stable, a young clerk from the dry goods store, and a widow who taught at the small schoolhouse. All 3 were out during the day, so the house was quiet. Willow spent the morning cleaning and cooking, preparing a pot of stew for dinner and fresh bread that filled the house with its yeasty aroma. Margaret dozed in a rocking chair on the front porch, wrapped in a shawl despite the warmth of the day. Willow checked on her frequently, her heart aching at how much her aunt had deteriorated. The strong, vibrant woman who had raised her was fading, and there was nothing Willow could do to stop it. It was early afternoon when she heard the sound of horse hooves stopping in front of the boarding house. Her pulse quickened. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the front door, trying not to appear too eager. Through the screen, she saw Marcus dismounting from his buckskin horse, looking slightly cleaner than yesterday, but still very much the mountain man in his worn buckskins and leather vest. His dark hair was tied back, revealing the strong lines of his face, and he had a package wrapped in brown paper tucked under one arm. Willow stepped out onto the porch, very aware of Margaret watching with interest from her rocking chair. "Marcus, you came. Said I would." He climbed the steps, his gray eyes sweeping over her in a way that made her feel warm. "You look well, much better than yesterday." "A bath and a night's sleep work wonders," she gestured to her aunt. "You remember Margaret Miller?" "Of course. Mrs. Miller, it is good to see you again. I'm sorry to hear you have been unwell." Marcus's voice was respectful, genuinely concerned. He removed his hat and held it in his hands. "Marcus Ellis," Margaret smiled up at him. "My niece tells me I owe you her life. That is a debt I can never repay, but you have my deepest gratitude." "No debt, madam. I'm just glad I was in the right place." He held out the package. "I brought you this, smoked venison from my last hunt. Thought it might help, being easy to digest and nourishing." Margaret's eyes glistened with tears. "That is very thoughtful, young man. Very thoughtful indeed. Willow, invite him in for coffee, for heaven's sake." "Would you like to come in?" Willow asked, hoping her voice did not betray how much she wanted him to say yes. Marcus hesitated, that same conflict she had seen yesterday crossing his features. He was a solitary creature, she realized, unused to company and probably uncomfortable with extended social interaction. But he nodded slowly. "Coffee would be good, thank you." Willow led him inside, intensely aware of his presence behind her as they walked through the neat boarding house to the kitchen. He seemed too large for the domestic space, his broad shoulders and muscular frame better suited to open wilderness. But he moved carefully, as if afraid his size might break something, and settled onto the chair she indicated with surprising grace. She poured coffee from the pot she had kept warm on the stove, then sat across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. Marcus looked uncomfortable, his large hands wrapped around the delicate china cup as if it might shatter. Willow searched for something to say that would not sound foolish. "Did you speak with the sheriff?" she finally asked. "I did. He's sending word to the surrounding towns, warning them about the raider gang. He asked if I would track them again, help bring them in." Marcus took a sip of coffee, his expression thoughtful. "I said I would think about it." "You're not sure?" "Tracking is one thing. Hunting men to see them hang is another. I have done it before, worked with law enforcement when I needed the money or when the cause was just. But it takes something out of you, that kind of work. Makes you harder." His gray eyes met hers. "I went to the mountains to find peace, not more violence." Willow understood the sentiment more than she would have expected. "But those men will hurt others if they are not stopped. You saw what they intended." "I know." His jaw tightened. "That is why I am considering it. But I wanted to check on you first, make sure you were settled. How is your aunt truly?" "Mrs. Miller was kind to me when I needed it. I hate to see her suffering." The genuine concern in his voice touched Willow deeply. She found herself telling him the truth, something she had not fully shared with anyone. The doctor says her heart is failing. She might have weeks or perhaps a few months if we are lucky. There's nothing to be done except keep her comfortable and make sure she is not alone. That is why you came from San Antonio, to be with her at the end. She is the only family I have left. She raised me after my parents died. I cannot let her die alone, no matter what it costs me. Willow realized her voice was shaking and took a breath to steady it. I'm sorry. I should not burden you with this. It is not a burden. Marcus reached across the table, his hand covering hers before he seemed to realize what he had done and pulled back. But the brief contact had sent electricity through Willow's entire body, warm and startling. You are a good niece, a good woman. Your aunt is lucky to have you. I am the lucky one. She saved me when I had nothing and no one. They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken things. Willow found herself studying his face, the way the afternoon light from the window highlighted the planes of his cheekbones, the fullness of his bottom lip beneath his beard, the small scar above his left eyebrow. He was perhaps 30, she guessed, maybe a few years older. Old enough to have lived a full life already, young enough that he should have years ahead of him. Why was he alone in the mountains? What had driven him there? Can I ask you something? She said before she could think better of it. You can ask. I cannot promise I will answer. But there was a hint of humor in his tone. Why do you live alone? You clearly are capable of being around people. You could have a different life if you chose. Marcus was quiet for so long she thought he would not respond. He stared into his coffee cup as if looking for words in its dark depths. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and rough with old pain. I was married once, 5 years ago. Her name was Sarah. We had a small ranch in Colorado. We're trying to build a life. Then a sickness swept through the area, some kind of fever. She died in 3 days, and there was nothing I could do. Nothing the doctor could do. I just had to watch her slip away. He paused, his jaw working. After I buried her, I could not stay in that house, could not stand being around the places we had planned to fill with children and laughter. So I sold the ranch and moved to the mountains. Seemed easier to be alone than to risk that kind of loss again. Willow's heart ached for him. She understood loss, had felt that same helpless rage when her parents died. I'm so sorry, Marcus, that must have been unbearable. It was a long time ago. I've made peace with it mostly. The mountains are good for solitude, and I'm good at surviving in them. It is a simple life, but a free one. He looked up at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her breath catch. But lately, I have been wondering if simple and free is the same as happy. And what conclusion have you reached? I have not yet. But meeting you yesterday, seeing how you faced down that danger, talking to you now, it makes me remember there are things worth coming down from the mountains for. Things I have been missing. The confession hung in the air between them, honest and raw. Willow felt her pulse racing. This strong, capable man who had saved her life was telling her he was lonely, that she had awakened something in him, and God help her, she felt the same pull, the same sense of possibility. I am not sure I am brave, she said softly. Yesterday I was terrified. The only reason I reached for my derringer was because I did not see any other choice. Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite it. You could have frozen, could have simply accepted whatever those raiders intended, but you reached for your weapon. That is courage, Willow. The way he said her name, the gentleness in his deep voice, made her feel seen in a way she never had before. She wanted to reach across the table and take his hand, wanted to close the distance between them and see if his lips were as firm as they looked. The intensity of the desire shocked her. She was not impulsive, not the kind of woman who fell for a man she barely knew. Yet here she was, fighting the urge to do exactly that. A soft cough from the doorway broke the moment. Margaret stood there, leaning on the doorframe, a knowing smile on her tired face. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think I need to lie down for a bit. Willow, will you help me upstairs? Of course. Willow rose immediately, moving to her aunt's side. She glanced back at Marcus, who had also stood, his hat in his hands again. Will you stay? I will only be a moment. I should probably be going, he said, but his eyes told a different story. I have taken enough of your time. Please stay, Willow heard herself say, just a little longer. I would like to hear more about your life in the mountains if you are willing to share. Something shifted in his expression, the walls he had built around himself lowering slightly. All right, I can stay a bit longer. Willow helped Margaret up the stairs, supporting her aunt's slight weight. Once they reached the bedroom, Margaret settled onto her bed with a sigh of relief, but caught Willow's hand before she could leave. That man downstairs is interested in you, child, and unless I am very much mistaken, you feel the same way. Aunt Margaret, do not deny it. I saw how you looked at each other. That is the beginning of something, Willow. Something real. Margaret's grip tightened despite her weakness. I will not be here much longer. A mother knows these things, and before I go, I need to know you will not be alone, that you will have someone to love and be loved by. You cannot marry me off to a man I met yesterday, Willow protested, though her heart was not in the argument. I am not marrying you off to anyone, but I am telling you not to let fear keep you from taking a chance. He is a good man, and good men are rare. If something is growing between you, water it. See what blooms. Promise me you will not let him ride away without at least finding out. Willow's throat was tight with emotion. I promise, but you need to rest now. We can talk more later. She went back downstairs to find Marcus standing in the kitchen, looking at the simple drawings pinned to the wall, sketches Willow had done years ago. He turned when he heard her footsteps. Did you draw these? She nodded, slightly embarrassed. When I was younger, I used to think I might be an artist, but it turned out I was better with needle and thread. They are good. You captured the light well. He pointed to a sketch of the view from Margaret's front porch at sunset. Artistic talent and courage. You are full of surprises, Miss Monroe. Just Willow, please. After everything that has happened, formality seems silly. Willow, then. He smiled slightly. Would you like to walk with me? I promised to show the sheriff where the raider attack happened, mark it on his map. The boarding house is not far from his office. You could use the fresh air, I think. It was a thin excuse, and they both knew it, but Willow nodded eagerly. Let me get my bonnet. They walked through Dalhart side by side, close enough that their arms occasionally brushed, sending small sparks of awareness through Willow each time. The town was busy with afternoon activity, people going about their business, wagons rolling past. A few folks stared at Marcus with obvious curiosity, this buckskin-clad mountain man walking with the neat young woman in her blue dress. If Willow had been more worried about propriety, she might have cared. But after facing death yesterday, propriety seemed less important than living. Tell me about the mountains, she said as they walked. What is it like, living up there alone? Marcus considered the question. Quiet. Peaceful, mostly. My cabin is in a valley about 20 miles north, surrounded by pine forest. There's a stream for fresh water, good hunting, and in the winter, snow that comes up past your waist. I trap beaver and fox, hunt elk and deer. Every few months I come down to trade my furs and stock up on supplies I cannot make myself. Coffee, salt, ammunition. The rest of the time it is just me in the wilderness. Does it not get lonely? Sometimes, especially in the winter when the snow is too deep to travel and the days are short. But I have my books, my work. And there is a freedom in that solitude, a clarity you cannot find when you are surrounded by people and their expectations. What do you read? Willow was curious about this side of him, the educated man beneath the rough exterior. Whatever I can get my hands on. Poetry, history, philosophy. I have a small library in my cabin, maybe 30 books I've collected over the years. They are probably my most prized possessions. He glanced at her. Does that surprise you? That a mountain man reads poetry? It does not surprise me that you have depths beyond what shows on the surface. I think people are rarely just one thing. She paused, then asked the question that had been nagging at her. Do you think you will go back to tracking those raiders? Probably. The sheriff made a good argument. They have already killed one man and were about to do worse. If I can help stop them before they hurt others, I should. But it means staying in the area for a while, maybe a week or more, depending on how hard they are to track. He stopped walking, turning to face her directly. To be honest, that prospect seems less burdensome than it would have 2 days ago. Because? Because of you. The admission was simple, direct. I have spent 5 years avoiding connections, avoiding anything that might make me care. But yesterday, when I saw you standing there with those raiders closing in, something in me woke up that I thought was dead. And today, talking with you, being near you, it feels right in a way nothing has in a very long time. Willow's heart was pounding so hard, she was certain he could hear it. I feel it too. I know we barely know each other, and it is probably foolish to think this could be anything more than... He stepped closer, and suddenly the busy street around them seemed to fade away. What if it is not foolish? What if this is exactly what it feels like, something real and worth pursuing? Then we would have to figure out how to make it work. You live in the mountains. I have to stay here with my aunt, and after, I need to return to San Antonio. My business, my life, it is all there. Or you could build a new life, here or wherever you want. His hand came up, his fingers gentle as they brushed her cheek. I am not asking you to decide anything right now, but I'm asking for the chance to court you properly, to see where this leads. Can we do that? Willow thought of her aunt's words. Promise me you will not let him ride away without at least finding out. She thought of the empty years stretching ahead, the safe, predictable life in San Antonio that had never quite felt like enough. And she thought of how alive she had felt, watching this man emerge from the rocks to save her, how right it felt to stand here with him now. Yes, she whispered, yes, we can do that. Marcus's smile was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Then I will stay in Dalhart while I track the raiders. I will take a room at your aunt's boarding house if she has one available. And when I am not working, I would like to spend my time getting to know you, Willow Monroe, every part of you. I would like that too. They stood there on the street, grinning at each other like fools, until a passing wagon forced them to step aside. The spell broke, and Marcus laughed, a deep, rusty sound that told her he did not do it often enough. They continued to the sheriff's office, where Marcus spent 20 minutes going over maps and details of the raider attack. Willow waited outside, watching the town go about its business, her mind whirling with the sudden change in her circumstances. 24 hours ago, she had been a woman focused on one thing, reaching her dying aunt. Now she found herself opening her heart to a mountain man who made her feel things she had never experienced before. It was crazy. It was impulsive. It was everything she usually was not. It was also the most exciting thing that had ever happened to her. When Marcus emerged from the sheriff's office, his expression was serious. The sheriff wants to put together a posse to go after the raiders tomorrow morning. He has asked me to lead it. Is that dangerous? Tracking always has risks, but with several armed men, it should be safer than what I did yesterday. He looked at her, concern evident in his gray eyes. I will be gone at least a day, maybe 2. Will you be all right? I will be fine. I have my aunt to care for, and I am quite capable of taking care of myself. She tried to sound braver than she felt. The thought of him riding into danger made her stomach clench, but she would not be the kind of woman who held a man back from doing what was right. Just promise me you will be careful. I promise. He offered her his arm. Let me walk you back to the boarding house. I would like to arrange for that room if your aunt is willing. They walked back through town, and this time Willow did not care who saw them or what they thought. Let the gossips talk. She had spent too much of her life worrying about propriety and appearances. If she was going to explore whatever this was with Marcus, she would do it openly and honestly. Margaret was delighted to rent Marcus a room, though her knowing smile suggested she understood exactly what was developing between her niece and the mountain man. She showed him to the room next to Jake the cowboy, a simple but clean space with a bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the back garden. Marcus paid her in gold dust from a leather pouch he carried, more than the room was worth, but he waved away her protests. You have been kind to me, Mrs. Miller, and you are letting me stay close to Willow. That is worth far more than a few weeks' lodging. You are a good man, Marcus Ellis, Margaret said warmly. I am glad my niece has found you, and I am glad you found her. Now, both of you stop hovering. I'm going to sit on the porch and enjoy the evening air. Willow, show Marcus where we keep the linens, and then perhaps you two can take a walk before supper. You have things to talk about, I'm sure. She left them standing in the hallway, and Willow felt her cheeks flush. Marcus looked equally uncomfortable but also amused. Your aunt is not subtle. She never has been, but she means well. Willow showed him where the linens were kept, helped him make up the bed with fresh sheets. Working beside him in the small room felt intimate, domestic. She found herself imagining what it might be like to do this every day, to share a home with this man. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt natural. When the bed was made, Marcus caught her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Walk with me? Just around the block. I want to talk before I have to leave in the morning." They walked in the cooling evening air, the sun sinking low on the horizon, painting everything gold and orange. Marcus told her more about his life, about growing up in Missouri, learning to hunt and track from his father, moving west after his parents died to seek his fortune. He told her about meeting Sarah, about the brief happy year they had together before the fever took her. And he told her about the 5 years since, about building his cabin with his own hands, about learning to be alone without being lonely most of the time. Willow shared her own story. Her childhood in San Antonio, the fever that killed her parents when she was 12, coming to live with Aunt Margaret in Dalhart, learning to sew from her aunt, discovering she had a talent for it, returning to San Antonio at 18 to open her own seamstress shop, building a business and a life, but always feeling like something was missing, like she was waiting for something she could not name. "Maybe you were waiting for this," Marcus said quietly. "For us? Maybe I was." They stopped at the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land. The sky was streaked with color, clouds lit from below in shades of pink and purple. Marcus turned to her, his expression serious. "I need you to understand something, Willow. I am not an easy man. 5 years in the mountains have made me rough around the edges. I am not used to talking about feelings or sharing my space, and there is a darkness in me sometimes, a sadness that I carry from losing Sarah. If we pursue this, if we let it become what I think it could be, you need to know those things about me." "And you need to know things about me," Willow countered. "I am stubborn. I do not like being told what to do. I've spent the last 5 years building my independence, and I will not give that up easily. I am practical to the point of being overly cautious sometimes, and I have a temper when pushed too far. If we do this, it will not always be easy." "I do not want easy," Marcus said, his hands coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that belied his size and strength. "I want real. I want honest. I want you, Willow, with all your stubbornness and practicality and whatever else comes with you. I have been half alive for 5 years. Meeting you has reminded me what it feels like to be whole." Tears stung Willow's eyes. "I want you too. I want to see where this goes, even though it scares me. Especially because it scares me. I do not want to be safe anymore, Marcus. I want to be alive." He kissed her then, a soft, careful press of his lips against hers as if she might break. But Willow was not breakable, and she kissed him back with all the emotion churning inside her, rising on her toes to wrap her arms around his neck. Marcus made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, one arm banding around her waist, the other hand tangling in her hair, pins falling forgotten to the ground. The kiss deepened, became something hungry and desperate, 5 years of loneliness on his side and a lifetime of waiting on hers, pouring into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Willow felt dizzy with want and possibility. Marcus rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, his breath warm on her face. "I should not have done that. I'm supposed to be courting you properly." "I am glad you did," Willow said firmly. "I wanted you to. Still, I do not want to rush this or make you feel pressured. When I leave tomorrow to track those raiders, I want you to think about what you really want, not what your aunt wants or what seems romantic in the moment, what you actually want for your life. And then when I come back, we can talk honestly about whether we can make this work." "All right, I can do that." Though Willow already knew her answer. What she wanted was him. They walked back to the boarding house slowly, hands linked, neither wanting the evening to end. Margaret was indeed on the front porch, rocking gently, a shawl around her shoulders. She smiled when she saw them, taking in their clasped hands and slightly disheveled appearance with obvious satisfaction. "Good walk?" "Very good," Marcus said, not releasing Willow's hand. "Thank you for the room, Mrs. Miller. I will be leaving early tomorrow with the posse, but I should be back within a few days. You be careful, young man. Willow would be very upset if something happened to you, and I do not have the energy to comfort a broken heart." "Aunt Margaret," Willow protested, mortified. But Marcus just smiled. "I will be very careful, madam. I have too much to come back to for anything else." He squeezed Willow's hand once more, then headed inside to settle into his room. Willow sat with her aunt on the porch, listening to the sounds of evening settling over Dalhart, her lips still tingling from Marcus's kiss, her heart fuller than it had been in years. "He's a good man," Margaret said softly. "Your uncle would have liked him." "I'm scared, Aunt Margaret. We just met. How can I feel this strongly about someone I just met? Because sometimes the heart knows things the mind has not figured out yet. Sometimes you meet someone and just know they are meant to change your life." Margaret reached over and took Willow's hand. "I am dying, child. We both know it. And the thing that has weighed on me most is the thought of leaving you alone. But if you have Marcus, if you two build something real together, then I can go in peace, knowing you will be loved and cared for. Do not talk like that. You still have time." "Not much. I can feel it, Willow. My heart is tired, but I'm not afraid, and you should not be either. Of death or of love. Both are part of life, and both should be embraced when they come." She smiled. "Now, help me inside. I want to go to bed knowing my niece has found someone worthy of her." Willow helped her aunt upstairs, settling her into bed with the same care she would give a child. Margaret's breathing was labored, her color poor. The end was coming soon, and the knowledge sat like a stone in Willow's chest. But there was also a strange peace in knowing Margaret had seen her connection with Marcus, had approved of it, had found comfort in the possibility of Willow having love in her future. She sat with her aunt until the older woman fell asleep, then returned to her own room. But sleep would not come. Her mind kept replaying the kiss, the feeling of Marcus's arms around her, the promise in his words. Tomorrow he would ride out to track dangerous men, and there was a chance he might not come back. The thought terrified her, but she also knew he was doing what was right, what his conscience demanded. All she could do was wait and hope and pray that fate, having brought them together, would not be cruel enough to tear them apart so soon. She rose before dawn, drawn by the sounds of men gathering in the street outside. The posse was assembling, 6 men including Marcus and the sheriff. Willow dressed quickly and went downstairs, where she found Marcus in the kitchen, checking his weapons and pack. He looked up when she entered, surprise and pleasure crossing his face. "You did not have to wake up." "I wanted to see you off." She had brought the package of food she had prepared the night before, unable to sleep. Bread, cheese, dried meat. "Take this. I know you probably have supplies, but thank you." He took the package, set it carefully in his pack. Then he crossed to her, his hands settling on her shoulders. "I will come back, Willow. I promise you that. You cannot promise that. Things happen. Then I will do everything in my power to keep that promise. I have something worth coming back to now." He kissed her forehead, gentle and lingering. "Think about what you want while I am gone, and know that whatever you decide, I will respect it." "I already know what I want," she whispered against his chest. "I want you." His arms tightened around her. "Then hold that thought. I will be back before you know it." He left with the posse just as the sun was rising, 6 riders heading south toward where the raider attack had occurred. Willow stood on the porch and watched until they disappeared from view, her heart in her throat. Margaret joined her, wrapped in her shawl, looking even frailer in the morning light. "He will come back," the older woman said with certainty. "That man has too much to live for now." The next 2 days were agony. Willow threw herself into caring for her aunt and managing the boarding house, but her mind was always on Marcus and the danger he faced. She slept poorly, waking at every sound, hoping for news. The other boarders were kind, respecting her worry, offering what comfort they could. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for word from the posse. Margaret's condition worsened. The effort of coming downstairs became too much, so Willow moved her activities upstairs, sitting with her aunt, reading to her, holding her hand. They talked about everything and nothing, filling the hours with memories and love. And Margaret made Willow promise again that she would give Marcus a real chance, that she would not let fear keep her from building a life with him. "I have watched you these past 2 days, Margaret said on the second evening, her voice thin and breathy. "Watched you worry and wait. That is love, child. When someone else's safety matters more than your own peace of mind, you love him already." I barely know him, Willow protested weakly. Your heart knows him. That's enough. Promise me, Willow. Promise me you will marry that man if he asks. Promise me you will let yourself be happy. I promise, Aunt Margaret. I promise. The older woman smiled and closed her eyes. Good. That is very good. I can rest now. She died that night, slipping away peacefully in her sleep with Willow holding her hand. One moment she was breathing, slow and shallow, and the next she simply was not. Willow sat there in the darkness, tears streaming down her face, grief crashing over her in waves. Her aunt, her protector, her second mother, was gone. She was alone in the world now, truly alone. Except she was not, she realized as dawn broke over Dalhart. She had Marcus if he came back. She had the promise of something new and beautiful, a future that Margaret had wanted for her so desperately. And she had the knowledge that her aunt had died in peace, secure in the belief that Willow would be loved and cared for. The town rallied around her. The other boarders helped with the arrangements. The preacher came and offered comfort. Margaret Miller had been well loved in Dalhart, and her funeral, held the next afternoon at the small church, was well attended. Willow stood through it all in a haze of grief, accepting condolences, making decisions, functioning on instinct and propriety because she did not know what else to do. The posse returned that evening, dusty and tired but victorious. They had tracked the raiders to a canyon 15 miles south, captured 3 of them in a brief gunfight, and the 4th had fled into New Mexico territory. The wounded raider from the Stagecoach attack was already in custody, being treated by the doctor before his trial. Justice had been served, and no one from the posse had been seriously injured. Willow learned all this from Jake the cowboy, who had witnessed the posse's return. She was sitting in Margaret's room, going through her aunt's things, trying to decide what to keep and what to give away. When she heard the knock on the door and Jake's gruff voice telling her Marcus was back and asking after her, her heart leaped. She found him downstairs, still in his dusty buckskins, his face lined with exhaustion. But his eyes lit up when he saw her, and he crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms without a word. Willow buried her face in his chest and finally let herself break, sobbing out her grief and relief and fear. Marcus held her through it all, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring wordless comfort. "Your aunt," he said when she had cried herself out. "Jake told me. I'm so sorry, Willow. I'm so sorry I was not here. You were doing what you needed to do, and she died peacefully. She made me promise." Willow's voice broke. "She made me promise I would let myself be happy with you if you came back. She wanted to know I would not be alone." Marcus pulled back just enough to look at her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "You will never be alone if I have anything to say about it. I love you, Willow Monroe. I know it is fast. I know it seems impossible, but it is true. I fell in love with you the moment I saw you standing up to those raiders, and every minute since has only made it stronger. I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you, wherever that life takes us. Will you have me?" Willow's heart felt like it might burst. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, Marcus. I thought I was crazy for feeling this way so fast, but I do. I love you." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, pouring everything he had into the connection between them, and Willow kissed him back, giving him her answer, her promise, her whole heart. Around them, the boarding house was quiet, the other residents having discreetly made themselves scarce. It was just the 2 of them, 2 broken people who had found healing in each other, 2 lonely souls who would never be lonely again. They were married 2 weeks later in the same church where Margaret had been laid to rest. The ceremony was simple, attended by the townspeople who had known Margaret and wanted to show their support for her niece. Willow wore a dress she had sewn herself, pale blue with white lace, and carried a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers. Marcus wore new trousers and a shirt he had purchased at the dry goods store, though he kept his leather vest and boots, unwilling to be completely tamed. He stood at the front of the church looking nervous and proud and so handsome that Willow's breath caught when she saw him. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus kissed her with such tenderness that Willow felt tears slip down her cheeks. They were tears of joy this time, not grief. Margaret would have been happy, she thought. This was what her aunt had wanted for her. The question of where they would live had been settled after much discussion. Willow had her aunt's boarding house now, left to her in Margaret's will. She could sell it and move to Marcus's cabin in the mountains, or Marcus could give up his solitary life and stay in Dalhart. In the end, they had decided on a compromise. They would keep the boarding house, renting rooms to provide steady income, but they would also spend half the year at Marcus's cabin, where he could still trap and hunt, and where Willow could experience the mountains she had heard so much about. It was not a conventional arrangement, but nothing about their relationship had been conventional from the start. Their wedding night was spent in Margaret's room, which Willow had cleaned and prepared for their use. Marcus was gentle with her, taking his time, making sure she felt cherished and safe. And when they finally came together, it was with a sense of rightness that went beyond physical pleasure, a joining of two souls who had been searching for each other without knowing it. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Marcus's hand stroking slowly up and down Willow's bare arm, her head resting on his broad chest. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, and marveled at how quickly her life had changed. A month ago, she had been alone in San Antonio, focused on her business, resigned to a life without passionate love. Now she was married to a mountain man, planning a future that was as unpredictable as it was exciting. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked softly. "That I'm happy, truly happy for the first time in a very long time, and that my aunt was right about everything. She was a wise woman." Marcus pulled her closer. "I wish I had known her better. I wish I could have thanked her properly for raising you to be the woman you are. I think she knows. I think she's at peace now, knowing we found each other." Willow propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at her husband's face in the lamplight. "Tell me about the mountains. Tell me what it will be like when we go there." So Marcus told her about the valley where his cabin stood, about the towering pines and the clear stream that ran year-round. He told her about the wildlife, the elk and deer, and occasionally bears that wandered through. He told her about winter storms that buried the world in white and spring mornings when the whole forest seemed to sing. And he told her about the profound peace of being surrounded by nature, the way the wilderness stripped away all pretense and forced you to be honest about who you were. "It sounds beautiful," Willow said when he finished, "and terrifying. I've always lived in towns. What if I cannot adapt?" "You will adapt. You are strong and capable, and I will teach you everything you need to know, how to shoot properly, how to read the weather, how to preserve food for winter. We will learn together how to share that life." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "But we do not have to leave tomorrow. We can stay here as long as you need, settle your aunt's affairs, make arrangements for the boarding house. There is no rush, Willow. We have the rest of our lives." They stayed in Dalhart through the winter. Willow sold her seamstress business in San Antonio by letter, arranging for her assistant to buy it at a fair price. She and Marcus ran the boarding house together, and the townspeople quickly grew accustomed to seeing the mountain man on the streets, going about domestic tasks with the same competence he brought to tracking and hunting. He helped repair the boarding house roof, chopped wood for the winter, and entertained the other boarders with stories of his adventures in the wilderness. Willow discovered marriage to Marcus was everything she had hoped and more. He was patient with her inexperience, both in the bedroom and in practical matters. He taught her to shoot properly with both rifle and pistol, taking her out to the edge of town for target practice until she could hit what she aimed at more often than not. He taught her about tracking, showing her how to read signs in the dirt and vegetation, and he shared his love of books, the two of them reading together by lamplight in the evenings, discussing philosophy and poetry with an intensity that surprised them both. In turn, Willow taught Marcus about building a life with another person, about compromise and communication. She helped him open up about his feelings, drawing out the emotions he had buried for so long. And she showed him that love did not have to mean loss, that caring for someone was worth the risk of eventually losing them, because the joy of the present outweighed the fear of the future. When spring came, melting the last of the winter snow, they made preparations to travel to Marcus's cabin. They hired a woman to manage the boarding house in their absence, a capable widow who had been friends with Margaret. They packed supplies, loaded a wagon, and said goodbye to Dalhart, promising to return in the fall. The journey north took 3 days, following rough trails through increasingly wild country. Willow was awed by the landscape, the way civilization fell away and nature took over. She saw her first wild elk, a massive bull that watched them pass from a hillside. She heard wolves howling at night and learned to identify bird calls during the day. And with each mile, she felt something in her loosen and expand, as if the wilderness was calling to a part of her she had not known existed. Marcus's cabin was everything he had described and more. It sat in a small valley surrounded by pine forest, a sturdy log structure with a stone chimney and a covered porch. The stream he had mentioned ran clear and cold about 50 yards from the door. There was a small barn for their horses and the wagon, a smokehouse for preserving meat, and a vegetable garden plot that needed tending. Inside, the cabin was one large room with a sleeping loft above, sparse but clean. Marcus's collection of books lined one wall, and his traps and hunting gear were neatly organized along another. It is not much," Marcus said, watching Willow's face anxiously. "But it is solid and warm, and—" "It is perfect," Willow interrupted, turning to kiss him. "It is our home, Marcus. That makes it perfect." They spent the spring and summer establishing their life together in the mountains. Marcus taught Willow how to trap, how to skin and prepare hides, how to hunt for food, and how to preserve what they caught. Willow planted the garden, started making improvements to the cabin, and discovered she had a knack for wilderness living that surprised them both. She learned which plants were edible and which were poisonous, how to make soap from animal fat, how to sew buckskin and work leather. The work was hard, much harder than anything Willow had done in town, but it was also deeply satisfying. She fell asleep each night exhausted and content, wrapped in Marcus's arms, the sounds of the forest around them. And she woke each morning to beauty that took her breath away, whether it was mist rising from the valley floor or the first rays of sun touching the mountain peaks. They were not completely isolated. A few times that summer, trappers or traders passed through, and Marcus always welcomed them, offering food and shelter in exchange for news of the outside world. Willow learned that mountain hospitality was a serious matter, that survival sometimes depended on the kindness of strangers. She became comfortable hosting these rough men, cooking for them and listening to their stories, though she was always relieved when they moved on, and she had Marcus to herself again. By late summer, Willow realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, the signs unmistakable once she knew what to look for. She told Marcus one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. He was silent for a long moment, his hand tightening on hers, and when she looked at him, she saw tears on his face. "I thought I would never have this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "A wife, a child, a family. I thought that part of my life was over when Sarah died. But you gave it back to me, Willow. You gave me everything." "We will have to go back to Dalhart before winter," Willow said practically, though her own eyes were wet. "I want to be near the doctor when the baby comes." "We will leave whenever you want. I will not risk you or our child." Marcus pulled her into his lap, holding her carefully, as if she had suddenly become fragile. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," she admitted, "but also excited. We are going to be parents, Marcus. We are going to have a baby." They returned to Dalhart in early October, settling back into the boarding house as the Texas plains prepared for winter. Willow's pregnancy progressed normally, and Marcus fussed over her with an attentiveness that was both endearing and occasionally annoying. He barely let her lift anything heavy, insisted she rest frequently, and consulted the doctor so often that the man finally told him to calm down or wait outside during future visits. Their son was born in late February 1879, during a cold spell that left frost on the windows. The labor was long and difficult, and Marcus paced the hallway outside the bedroom like a caged animal, driving the midwife to distraction with his constant questions. But when he was finally allowed in to meet his son, he held the tiny, squalling infant with such wonder and tenderness that Willow fell in love with him all over again. They named the baby Matthew Ellis, after Marcus's father. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's determined chin, and from the first day it was clear he had inherited Marcus's lung capacity and Willow's stubbornness. He was a healthy, vigorous baby, and Marcus doted on him with a devotion that would have been comical if it had not been so touching. "I never knew I could love something this much," Marcus confessed one night as he rocked Matthew to sleep. "It is terrifying and wonderful at the same time." "Welcome to parenthood," Willow said with a tired smile. She was exhausted but happy, watching her husband with their son, marveling at the family they had created. They stayed in Dalhart through Matthew's first year, wanting to be close to the doctor and to give Willow time to recover and adjust to motherhood. But as their son grew stronger and more adventurous, they began planning their return to the mountains. Willow found she missed the wilderness, the peace and beauty that had become part of her soul. And Marcus, while patient with town life, was clearly restless for his mountain home. They returned to the cabin when Matthew was 15 months old, now an experienced family rather than newlyweds playing at wilderness living. The cabin was as they had left it, weathered but sound. They settled back into the rhythm of mountain life, but everything was different now with a child. Marcus built a fence around the porch to keep Matthew safe and hung a cradle from the ceiling for naps. Willow learned to work with one eye always on their son, to cook and clean and tend the garden while Matthew explored his limited world with fearless curiosity. The years that followed were good ones, full of hard work and simple joys. Matthew grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy who could track deer by the time he was 4 and handle a fishing pole at 5. Marcus taught him everything he knew about the wilderness, and Willow taught him to read and write using the books from Marcus's collection. They split their time between the mountains and Dalhart, giving Matthew the best of both worlds, the freedom and wildness of the frontier and the education and society of town life. When Matthew was 5, Willow gave birth to a daughter they named Willa, after herself and in honor of Margaret. She had her mother's auburn hair and her father's gray eyes, and from the moment she was born, she owned Marcus completely. He, who had been such a tough, solitary mountain man, became putty in his daughter's hands, unable to deny her anything. "You are going to spoil her terribly," Willow warned him, watching Marcus carry 3-year-old Willa on his shoulders while Matthew ran ahead on the trail to the cabin. "She is my little girl. I'm supposed to spoil her." Marcus reached up to steady Willa's legs, his expression soft. "Besides, she has you to keep her grounded and sensible. She will be fine." And she was. Both children thrived, growing up strong and capable, comfortable in both the wilderness and civilization. Marcus and Willow continued their pattern of spending half the year in the mountains and half in Dalhart, managing the boarding house and maintaining connections to both worlds. The boarding house became known as a place where mountain men and trappers were always welcome, where they could get a good meal and fair treatment from people who understood their way of life. Marcus never completely gave up his solitary nature, but he learned to balance it with family life. Sometimes he would disappear into the forest for a day or two to check his trap lines alone, and Willow learned not to worry but to simply welcome him back when he returned. In turn, Marcus encouraged Willow to pursue her interests, setting up a corner of the cabin where she could draw and paint, bringing her supplies from town and praising her artistic efforts even when she thought they were mediocre. They built a good life together, full of love and laughter and the occasional argument that came with any real partnership. They grew older, the lines on their faces deepening, but the bond between them only strengthened. Marcus's dark hair gained threads of silver, and Willow's auburn faded slightly. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the people they had been that day on the road when raiders wanted the stagecoach to stop and a mountain man wanted her safe. On their 10th anniversary, Marcus took Willow back to the spot where he had first seen her, where he had stepped out from the rocks to save her from the raiders. They stood together in the late afternoon sun, older and wiser, their hands clasped. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked. "Giving up your life in San Antonio, the security and civilization, to follow a mountain man into the wilderness?" Willow looked at him, this man who had saved her life and then transformed it, who had given her children an adventure and a love deeper than she had ever imagined possible. "Not once. Not for a single moment. You gave me everything I did not know I wanted, Marcus. You gave me a life worth living. You did the same for me. I was just surviving before you, going through the motions. You taught me how to live again, how to love again. You and the children, you are my whole world." He pulled her close, kissing her with the same passion he had shown that first time, in this same spot, 10 years ago. "I love you, Willow Ellis. Forever." "Forever," she agreed, kissing him back, knowing it was true. They continued their life for many more years, watching their children grow into adults who chose their own paths. Matthew became a guide and tracker like his father, respected throughout the territory for his skills. Willa married a rancher and gave Marcus and Willow grandchildren to spoil, bringing them back to the cabin each summer so they could know the mountains their grandparents loved. Marcus and Willow grew old together, their bodies slowing but their spirits still wild and free. When Marcus was 60, he told Willow he wanted to spend his final years in the mountains, that the cabin was where he belonged. She agreed without hesitation, because the mountains had become her home too, as much as Dalhart or San Antonio had ever been. They sold the boarding house to Jake the cowboy, who had married and wanted to settle down, and moved permanently to the valley where they had spent so many happy summers. Their children and grandchildren visited often, keeping them connected to the wider world. But mostly it was just the two of them again, as it had been in those early days of their marriage, except now they moved more slowly and needed naps in the afternoon. They still read together by the fire. They still talked for hours about everything and nothing. And they still loved each other with the fierce devotion that had sparked between them 30 years ago when raiders wanted the stagecoach to stop and a mountain man wanted her safe and found a way around them. Marcus died on a bright autumn morning when he was 72, sitting on the porch of the cabin with Willow beside him, looking at the mountains he loved. He simply closed his eyes and slipped away, peaceful and content, his hand in hers. Willow held him and wept, but through her tears she smiled, because she knew he had died happy, surrounded by beauty, having lived the full life he had chosen. She lived another 5 years after that, spending her final time in the cabin they had built together, surrounded by memories and love. Their children took turns staying with her, making sure she was not alone, but Willow told them she was never really alone. Marcus was still with her, in the wind through the pines, in the rush of the stream, in every sunset that painted the mountains gold. She died in her sleep, quietly and peacefully, just before her 80th birthday. They buried her next to Marcus in a clearing overlooking the valley, with the mountains standing eternal watch above them. And if the wind that day seemed to carry the sound of laughter, light and joyous, their children chose to believe it was just their imaginations. But in the cabin that night, Matthew found a letter his mother had left, sealed and addressed to her children and grandchildren. He opened it by lamplight and read it aloud to his sister, and the family gathered there. In Willow's clear handwriting, she had written out the story of how she and Marcus met, how raiders had wanted the stagecoach to stop, and how a mountain man had wanted her safe and found a way around them. She wrote about love at first sight and taking chances and building a life on faith and courage. And she ended with these words, which would be passed down through generations of their family. I was taught to be sensible, to be cautious, to take the safe path. But the day your father saved my life, I learned that sometimes the most sensible thing you can do is take a leap of faith. Sometimes the safe path is actually the one that leads to nothing. Your father and I had 35 years together, 35 years of joy and adventure and love that filled every moment. I would not trade a single day of our wild, unpredictable life for a century of safe, predictable comfort. So take chances, my darlings. Follow your hearts. And when you find someone who makes you feel alive, who makes you want to be brave, hold on to them with everything you have. That is the secret to a life well lived. That is what your father taught me, and it is the most valuable thing I can pass on to you. Love fiercely, live fully, and do not be afraid of the wilderness, whether it is in the mountains or in your heart. The greatest adventures always begin with a leap of faith. Matthew folded the letter carefully, his eyes wet with tears, and looked around at his family gathered in the cabin his parents had built. She was right, he said softly, about all of it. They loved each other until the very end and beyond. That is the legacy they left us. Not land or money, but the example of what real love looks like. And so the story of Marcus and Willow became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The cabin stood for many decades, maintained by their descendants, a testament to the life they had built together. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the pines and the stream sang its eternal song, it was said you could sometimes hear two voices, laughing and talking, as much in love in eternity as they had been in life. The boarding house in Dalhart eventually bore a plaque naming it the Miller Ellis House, in honor of Margaret, Willow, and Marcus. The town grew and changed, but the house remained, a reminder of a different era when raiders roamed the Texas plains and mountain men came down from the wilderness. And sometimes, on the anniversary of that day, when raiders wanted the stagecoach to stop and a mountain man wanted her safe and found a way around them, people would gather at the house to remember the story of true love found in the most unlikely of circumstances. Because that is what great love stories do. They endure. They inspire. They remind us that even in the hardest of times, in the wildest of places, two souls can find each other and build something beautiful that lasts forever. Marcus and Willow had found that, and in finding it, they had left a legacy that would never be forgotten. Their story was one of courage and chance, of a woman who was brave enough to love a mountain man, and a man who was brave enough to love again after loss. It was a story of the Wild West, of danger and adventure, and the raw beauty of untamed land. But most of all, it was a story of two people who recognized in each other something essential, something worth fighting for, worth building a life around. And that, in the end, is the greatest story there is. The story of love that conquers fear, that bridges different worlds, that grows stronger with time instead of fading. Marcus and Willow had that love, and it sustained them through everything life brought, from those first dangerous moments on the road to their final peaceful days in the mountains they had claimed as home. Their descendants continued to tell the story, adding their own chapters, their own adventures. But they always came back to the beginning, to that September day in 1878, when raiders wanted the stagecoach to stop and a mountain man wanted her safe and found a way around them. Because that was where it all began, where two lives intersected and changed each other forever, where love sparked in the dust and danger of the Texas plains and grew into something that would last for generations. The mountains remained, eternal and unchanged, standing watch over the valley where Marcus and Willow had built their cabin and raised their family. The stream still ran clear and cold, singing the same song it had sung for them. And if you listened closely, on those quiet evenings when the whole world seemed to hold its breath, you might hear it still, the echo of a love that refused to die, that lived on in stories and memories, and the legacy of a family built on courage and faith, and the simple truth that sometimes the heart knows what it wants before the mind can catch up. Marcus and Willow had trusted their hearts, had taken the leap of faith, and they had been rewarded with a lifetime of love and joy and adventure. Their story was a reminder that the best things in life often come when we are brave enough to step off the safe path, to embrace the unknown, to say yes to possibility even when it seems impossible. And so their story ended, as all the best love stories do, not with an ending at all, but with a continuation, a legacy that lived on in their children and grandchildren and all who came after. They had loved well and lived fully, and in doing so, they had created something immortal, not in the grand gestures or dramatic moments, though those were part of it, but in the quiet daily choice to love each other, to build together, to face whatever came as a team. That was their true triumph, their lasting gift to the world, the proof that love, real and honest and brave, can transform everything. It can take a lonely mountain man and a grieving seamstress and turn them into a family, a legacy, a story worth telling. It can take a dangerous moment on a dusty road and turn it into the beginning of something beautiful. It can take two wounded hearts and make them whole. Marcus and Willow knew this, lived this, believed this with every fiber of their beings. And because they did, their love story became more than just their own. It became a beacon for others, a promise that no matter how dark things seem, no matter how lost or alone you feel, love can find you. It can save you. It can give you a reason to be brave. All you have to do is be willing to take the chance, to step into the unknown, to trust that sometimes the mountain man emerging from the rocks is not just saving your life, but offering you a future you never dared to dream of. And sometimes the woman on the stagecoach is not just another face in the crowd, but the missing piece you did not know you needed, the one who will teach you that living and surviving are not the same thing, and that a heart can heal if you let it. That was the story of Marcus Ellis and Willow Monroe, and it was a story worth remembering, worth retelling, worth carrying forward through the generations. Because in the end, We all need reminders that love is possible, that happy endings exist, that courage is rewarded, and that two people who find each other against all odds can build something that will outlast them both. They had done exactly that, and their legacy lived on, as enduring and beautiful as the mountains themselves, as constant as the stream that flowed past their cabin, as eternal as the love that had brought them together and sustained them through everything life could throw at them. Marcus and Willow had found their happily ever after, and in doing so, they had given hope to countless others who heard their story and dared to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, such love was possible for them too. And that is the greatest gift any love story can give: the courage to believe in love again, to take the leap, to say yes to possibility. Marcus and Willow had given that gift through their example, through their willingness to be vulnerable and brave, through their commitment to building something beautiful in the wilderness. Their story would continue to inspire for as long as it was told, a testament to the enduring power of love and the beautiful chaos that unfolds when two souls recognize each other and decide to build a life together. So the story ended, but also did not end, because true love stories never really do. They continue in the hearts they touch, the lives they change, the courage they inspire. Marcus and Willow's story was one of those. A love for the ages, born in danger and growing into something that would outlast them both, something that would remind the world that even in the wildest of places, even in the hardest of times, love finds a way. And that is how it should be.